Welcome back to Horrifying Stories. Two-time world champion in adventure racing and seven-time Ironman triathlon finisher, Danelle Ballengee was 35 years old when she went for a trail run in Moab, Utah on December 13, 2006. She had been running for an hour already when suddenly her foot slipped on some black ice, sending her down the steep rocky canyon, past a series of ledges before eventually crash landing to the ground 60 feet below. This is her horrifying story. Viewer discretion is advised. Needless to say, it was a hard fall. Danelle survived the 60-foot fall, but she was miles away from the nearest chance of rescue. It was a deserted trail, no one else was around to help her. She touched her legs and still felt them, so she attempted to get up immediately. Then, reality hit her, and right at that moment she realized her serious condition. Danelle could no longer get up, her body couldn't support her own weight. Her pelvis had been shattered to pieces and she was all alone, and help was nowhere near. All she had was Tasman, her dog, whom she fondly called Taz and has been her running buddy for around almost 3 years. On a regular run, they would go 15 miles and would sometimes even hike up the summit of one of Colorado's mountains that go as high as 14,000 feet. Like Danelle, Taz has always been up for the challenge. When Danelle slipped and fell into the steep terrain, Taz quickly ran to her side, but Danelle knew her dog would not be able to fully comprehend her dire situation. Lying on the ground in a remote area, she knew she needed to get help fast. The problem was no one had any idea she needed help. Her truck was parked at the trail's starting point and she had run for about an hour already. She was halfway through her supposed trail in a small canyon that led to a jeep trail, ultimately leading to the trailhead. Danelle's first instinct was to get out of the canyon and make her way back to the truck so she could get the help she badly needed. Desperate, she pushed herself to crawl her way back. She was in intense agony. She yelled in deep pain as she slowly moved, relying on her arms to pull her whole body. After around 5 hours of painful crawling, to her dismay and frustration, she only covered a quarter of a mile in distance. The sun was starting to set and temperature levels were starting to drop to the 20s. She could sense her hands were starting to freeze. She chanced upon a puddle of water and took a direct sip of the water to somehow give her a little boost of energy. As she pushed further forward, Danelle came to the edge of a rock and stopped as she saw it was a dead end for her. Right in front of her was an estimated drop of 4 feet. And so, she was left with no other choice. She was bound to stay for the night on that ledge under the night sky, cold and without shelter. As Danelle laid on her back, she kept herself warm by tucking her hands between her legs. In the effort to keep herself awake as well, she kept moving as if in a crunching exercise and kept rubbing her hands together. She did this repeatedly for 14 hours. She knew it was no time for her to sleep. She had to stay conscious, otherwise, she might not be able to wake up again. Fortunately, Taz was there for her to cuddle, giving her additional warmth. By the break of dawn, Danelle again forced herself to crawl her way back to the start of the trail. This time, the struggle was harder and the pain more excruciating as the hours went by. It was so painful that she had to rest in between every move to somehow regain energy and endurance from extreme pain. She screamed with every pain, calling out for help, hoping someone was nearby. However, hours went quickly by and the sun began to set again. Danelle was again left with no other choice but to spend another night out in the cold, right exactly where her energy and endurance had taken her thus far that day. To her, that second night felt longer and colder. As she lay there on the ground, her life seemed to flash before her. She was reminded of her family and friends, and it was then that reality dawned on her. She wasn't ready to die. She decided she needed to fight for her life. At that time, the area around her waist started to show blood clots and bruises, a telling sign that she was suffering from internal bleeding. Still, she did what she had to do. Like the previous night, she did crunches and rubbed her hands against each other for another 14 hours that night. By then, Taz somehow seemed to recognize that something was wrong. Out of desperation and hopelessness, Danelle tried to talk to Taz in getting some help for her. Refusing to give up, she continued to push herself forward by crawling, but suddenly, she found herself falling and rolling on the ground into a small pothole, just right above the ledge that she was previously staying on the first night. She pulled herself out of the canyon slowly and found herself back at the ledge where there was a puddle of water. It has now been 2 days since she last peed, and her body could no longer hold it in further. After much struggle, she ended up peeing in her pants, leaving her pants wet and her body more prone to frostbite. Meanwhile, Taz seemed extra restless, running around up and down the canyon. Taz went back to Danelle every once in a while, and each time, Taz licked her face as soon as she got back. At that point, all Danelle ever hoped for was for someone to at least notice that she's now missing. She cried aloud in frustration, yelling for help. 2 hours later, she found herself starting to believe that this was her end. There were no signs of rescue. In spite of the immense pain, she decided to press on even after being awake for over 60 hours. However, in a few hours dusk would fall once again. The thought of staying for another night out in the open seemed like torture to Danelle, that she wanted to fall asleep and die instead, than spending one more night in such extreme conditions. Frustrated and helpless, all she could do was cry. As she was crying, she saw Taz come back from all his running, coming close to her as his tail kept wagging and started to lick the tears from her cheeks. The next thing she knew, a helicopter was hovering above her. With the remaining ounce of energy in her, she lifted her hand and waved frantically at the chopper, hoping it would spot her. The chopper turned and went around before coming back flying lower. Then, it turned back again. In a matter of seconds, Danelle heard the rustling sound of an engine seemingly getting closer to where she was. She felt a sudden boost of energy as the sound got closer before stopping just right below the ledge that dropped 4 feet down. A man named Bigo Berhart, riding an ATV, came and found her. He approached her, overwhelmed with joy at having found her alive. They were both in tears, and Taz went to Bigo and licked his hand as he happily wagged his tail as if expressing gratitude to the man who came to their rescue. Not long after, a 4-man rescue team from the Grand County Search and Rescue arrived. Danelle was wrapped in a warm sleeping bag. Then, minutes later, the chopper found a secure spot to land, and Danelle was airlifted to a hospital in Grand Junction in no time. Danelle underwent a 6-hour surgery to restore her pelvis, which apparently has been shattered into 4 pieces. Extensive therapy immediately followed for a few months to bring her to full recovery. Rescuers believed that finding Danelle fast was all because of Taz, who gave them the lead. They first saw the dog somewhere along the trail, and it resembled the description of Danelle's canine buddy. Rescuers tried to approach the dog as soon as they saw him, but Taz seemed to challenge them to a chase. He ran fast and eventually led them to where Danelle was. Rescuers think they'd still be able to locate her without Taz, but her condition would have been worse than it actually was. 5 years later, the 40-year-old Danelle is married and has 2 kids. She still goes on regular runs and hikes, and has even organized the Moab Trail Marathon that passes by the exact same spot. Taz continued to be her running buddy after the incident, but eventually grew weak enough to stop running at 9.5 years old. The distinct loyalty and dependability of dogs, like what Taz showed, indeed proves that dogs are truly man's best friend. Thank you for making it this far. If you liked this video, please subscribe to our channel and click the like button. Let us know what you think about this story in the comments below. Once again, thank you, and see you on the next one.